All right, so I've got a lot of questions from people regarding my last video that I put up regarding block, element, model naming and utilities, and how I use those in bricks. There's a lot of questions that come through as to how I decide on what to use as framework variables or utilities and what to use as brick utilities, all that sort of stuff. I thought I'd just try and simplify the thinking between what is a block, what is an element, and what is a modifier. And also, the whole purpose of me doing this is to speed up production and to keep things consistent and scalable. So what I wanted to do is look at how would we relate this to models that we create in Figma. So I've got a very simple service block template that I've created here. I've got two components. My first component is my service block as a standard, and my second component is my service block with some modifiers so that the headers, footer, and body copy is all centered. So I'm going to look at how we relate this into bricks as a one-to-one relationship. Now, it's not quite one-to-one, but it's pretty close. Now, the reason it's not one-to-one is in Figma, we don't have REMs, and we don't have any styles for sizes or spacing. We've only got text, color, effect, and grid. So there's no way we can create those in Figma and relate those across to any page builder. But we can do something close enough, like what I've done here, for example, is I've created some text styles. And I might just zoom this in a little bit because the UI in Figma is a little bit small for this kind of thing. So what I've done is create these text styles here where I've got if you, which is the same as my last video. So I'm going to use this as a framework utility. So framework utility text small is 10 pixels, which is going to be 1 REM in bricks, 15 for normal, or 1.5 in bricks, 20 for medium, 30 for large, 50 for XL, and 100 for XXL. And again, these will relate to REMs in bricks, where the XXL will be 10 REM. Now, because we don't have a spacing style that we can relate this to in Figma, what I thought I would do is in bricks, I would relate to these for spacing. So I'd create variables in bricks for FU, SP for spacing, S for small, and I'd use pixels. So FUSPS would be 10 pixels, FUSPN for normal would be 15 pixels. And there's a good argument that I read for that a little while ago where with accessibility, when you use REMs and the user changes their base font size for their browser, all of your text, headings, everything all expand. And the temptation is to use REMs or even EMs for your spacing as well, so your paddings, your margins, all that sort of stuff. But when you think about it, it doesn't make sense because from an accessibility point of view, making the text bigger so you can read it makes sense, but making the spacing bigger just uses up more space. It doesn't actually make it more usable or more readable. So spacing for me now is always done in pixels, and fonts are always done, or text size is always done in REM for that reason. So this is a really easy one-to-one map, which I'll show you shortly. The other thing I create is these colors here. So the first 6 colors are actually broken into 3 colors, and it's using the methodology of 60-30-10 for your color grading, where my primary and primary variation, they're just slight variations. So that's 60% of your design. Secondary and secondary variation is 30% of your design. Accent and accent variation is 10% of your design. And they're just very slight differences in color or brightness or saturation. So those colors there. And then I normally create a white and a black and a few grays. In this case, I've just created 3 grays. I don't think I'm using them in this design, but it's just to show the point. So the first thing we've got to do is we've got to get this translated into bricks. So I'll come back to all the naming, everything else, and I'll look at just those. So what I'm doing, now, by the way, I'm doing this without using any external tools. So no code managers, no SAS, compilers or anything like that, which I would normally use for my frameworks. I just want to do this simply here so you understand exactly what we're doing here. So if we go into our settings and go into my custom code, all I've done here in my custom code in the custom CSS is my FU text S. So over in Figma, FU text S is 10. So over in here, I'm setting that FU text S is 1 REM. Now dash dash obviously is meaning it is a CSS variable. We haven't named those in that way in Figma. FU text S is 1 REM, which relates to, where is it here? Relates to, keep clicking on the wrong screen. Relates to FU text S is 10 here, 10 pixels. FU text N is 15, which is my FU text N is 1.5 REM. And then I've just taken these, copied them down to here, and I've changed text to SP, and I've put the actual pixels in there because I'm going to use those for spacing. All right. And then down here, I've created, these are just variables, by the way, CSS variables, created some utility classes. So you can use these for font sizes, etc. I'll show you where you can use that. So basically, it's just a translation from these variables into a font size using that variable. So if I apply this class to any text element, it's going to set the text size to 1 REM. Make sense so far? And then I just add 4 sections, a padding at the top and bottom of my XXL, and on the sides of just normal. So 1.5 on the sides, so 15 pixels on left and right, and 100 pixels top and bottom. And that is all I'm going to use for this video. The rest of it, I'm not going to bother with. If you're using a proper framework, you would end up with a whole bunch of variables for all of these spacing and text sizes. Mostly the spacing, I should say, where you've got spacing all around, spacing top, spacing bottom, all the different variations for that. You really need SAS to create those, and I'm just doing this without that, just purely with bricks. So we've got our CSS done for our utilities here. So if we head over to Bricks Builder, we go into the theme styles, and for our typography, all I'm doing is setting my body to be Poppins, which is the same as what I've done. We look at all of these here. They're all Poppins. And then I've just set the headings to be all Poppins and just a slightly heavier font weight. So that's all I've done for my theme. By the way, if you're not used to using themes, when you create a theme, you've got to set the condition. So I've just set the condition for the entire site here. And then under my colors, this one's a little bit trickier. So it's a bit, I think there's a bit of a legacy thing with bricks where I don't use any of these colors. They're applied to some default styling for some alerts, buttons, things like that. But I prefer to control that differently. So to get to your palette, so you've got to click on one of these. So you click on that palette there, for example. I've created a new palette just by clicking on the plus, giving it a name, hitting save. And I've called it Figma BEM. And then when I've edited that palette, I've set it as the default palette. Okay. Now, by default, it shows you these little swatches. It does have the names on them. But what we want to look at is the list view. So we look at the list. And then here's our primary variation, secondary variation, accent variation, white, black, and grays. Now, it's a little bit quirky. So let's give you one example. If I go to the secondary, for example, if I go into my secondary in Figma, I copy that there, come back over to my secondary in bricks. You would think when you click on this, you're editing the secondary, but you're not. If you make any changes, it's going to save a new color. You've got to click on this edit pencil, and then when you change this color, you're editing that particular color in the palette, and then you hit save and it updates that there. And also with naming. So if I just create a new color just by moving that and hitting save, see, it creates a new color. Now to name it, I've got to click on the pencil. I've got to, oops. To name it, I've got to click on the pencil, give it a name, new name, You'd think hitting enter would work. It doesn't. You've got to click on this save tick, and now I've got a color with a new name. So that's pretty much how you create your palettes. So this palette here needs to be exactly the same as this palette in Figma. And that's all we need to do with setting up our one-to-one relationship between sizes, spacing, and colors. Now, the other thing I'm just going to show here is on this frame, I've set up a grid, which is 10 pixels. And the reason for that is because of the 1 REM being 10 pixels in bricks. It just makes sense to. So I'm just going to turn my grid on with Shift G and have a look at what I've got here. So if I look at my header, I can see it's all aligned to 10 pixels. So I've got 10 pixels, so one grid spacing, 10 pixels at the top, 10 at the bottom, 10 at the left, 10 between the icon and this header. And then the same with, actually that doesn't look right there, but should have 10 pixels padding all around the outside of this body. And the foot is the same as the header pretty much. All right, so it's a good indication of what we need to do here. So how do we create this into bricks? So first thing you'll notice is on the left hand side, if I look at my service block, all of the naming of these parts that make up this component are using the BEM naming. So my block is just service-block. My header is my service block, the header underscore indicating it as a element, header, icon, element heading. Service block body, so it's the element of the body, element of the footer, element icon, element heading again. So this naming is exactly the same as what we would use in bricks with CSS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by just copying that name there for the service block, head over to bricks, I'm going to create a new section, and see by default, because of this class here, section padding FUSB which is 100 pixels, by default straight away I get 100 pixels at the top and bottom. You can override that on a per section basis, but that's going to be our default. Okay, and I end up with a container. Now I'm going to start building up my service block now. So I'm going to grab a div. Always start with a div. Don't use these blocks here, because you're starting with a div, which is just a basic building block where you set all the properties. There's nothing preset on it. So I'm just going to name this here with that service block. So I'm pasting that in there. I'm going to then add the class, global class, creates a global class and adds it to that service block. Right, now the next thing we've got inside that service block, we've got a service block header. Copy that name there. Going to get another div. I'm going to stick it inside there. Just make sure it's ended up in the right place. Didn't. This drag and drop isn't always as good as it needs to be, so luckily we got this structure on the right hand side here. So paste that into the name, paste that into the global styles to create it. All right, and then we've got a service block icon inside there. Copy, go grab an icon, drag that inside. That still didn't end up in the right place. Go there. Let's check, maybe just make it a ball. Okay, and we'll give that the class as icon as well, as the service block icon. And name that there as well. And what else do we have inside there? We've got a heading. We're going to grab a heading element, drag it inside there. Did I copy that? I can't recall if I did. I don't think I did. Copy that name. Go to my heading there. Oops. Go to there as well. Okay, and then we've got a body. Okay, so copy that name. I'm just going to duplicate this header, delete the icon, call that body, rid of that class off there. There's the body. I think we've got a rich text box inside the body. There, grab some of my favourite Bob Ross, Lorem Ipsum stuff here. stick that inside there. Okay, and whatever else we've got the footer, which looks pretty much the same as the header structure. So I'm just going to duplicate the footer, sorry, the header, and drag it down. Drag that down to there. Oh, Jesus. There we go. Copy that name. Copy that. Get rid of that class off there and add the new one. All right. So there's pretty much our structure, and we've got all of our BEM blocks all created. Pretty simple, isn't it? Just copy and paste straight from Figma. So if you're doing a brand new design, grab this component, chuck it on the screen, then you can go back into your bricks and just copy and paste these, create the same structure that you've got here in bricks, and you're pretty much on your way. Right, so let's have a look at what we've got in Figma. So we've got a single column, and I'm going to use flex on this because I want to push the footer to the bottom so we get some equal height. So I'm going to use a flex of a column on the actual block. So I'm going to go to the block at the top here, and I'm going to select the block. Make sure you always select the class so they're highlighted in orange, and we want to tell that we want it to be a column, and we want the display to be flex. Okay, you'll understand this a little bit later when I do something with the footer. Okay, so we then go to our block header, make sure it's selected again. We want that to be a row with a display of flex. We want to align all these elements in the middle. And we also want to have some padding around the outside. Now, all of these I've done in Figma, I've just added a 10 pixel padding around the outside wall. So let's use the padding of 10. So where are we going to get that from? Here's our variables over here. Our spacing of small is going to give us 10 pixels. I'm going to grab that variable, get back over here, go to my style, layout, group my paddings, and use a variable of FUSPS. And again, FU is a framework utility. Use your own naming if you want to. Now, we haven't got a space between the icon and the heading, which we do have a 10 pixel one there. I'm going to use that same variable. I'm going to go to the column gap and put that there. Now I've got a 10 pixel spacing between the heading and the icon. Now these two are the same elements as those. So all I need to do in the footer is change the display to flex, and my padding there, and my content here, my column gap. Okay, for some reason that there, what have we got there? Flex, there you go. Service block footer, not inside the first service block. It's a bit tricky sometimes to drag and drop, and having this is good, but it still gets a bit tricky sometimes. So there we go. So it's inside there. Now, what did I miss on that? I didn't align vertically. There you go, so I'm aligned vertically. All right, so we're off to a flying start. All right, so let's go back to our Figma, and we see we've got a green icon, so it's using our accent color, and the size is 20 pixels. All right, so what gives us 20 pixels? 20 pixels is our spacing medium, or our text medium. Now, we're going to use a font icon, so I'm going to use the text so we can make it variable with the scaling of the font size in the browser. So I'm going to grab that text M, go back to my icon, going to set that to var text M. I'm going to do the same with this heading for the style, typography, text medium. Okay, now what else have we got on here? We've got the background of the service block header is my secondary variation. So let's go to the service block header, and we're going to set our, so that's selected, and set our background to the variation. I think we've got the same on the footer, so let's just go there now. Set that to the variation. On the body, we've got the background of secondary. Yep, okay. And also on the body, we've got primary variation, I think. We have primary variation on the actual text. So let's go to the block body. Oops, for our typography, we're going to set our color to our primary variation. And we haven't actually got any padding on here, so I've forgotten to do the padding on there. So let's go to our layouts, padding, bar. I think we'll use spacing. We'll use spacing, not spacing small, I think. We want the 10 pixels. And let me just double check that I've used the correct one on these. The header, yep, spacing, footer, spacing, block body spacing. All right, so we're getting there. Now, the icon in Figma is using the accent color. So let's go back to our icon and go to the icon color and make that accent. And the header is using white. We go to heading, and make sure we put the typography, font style of white, and we're getting pretty close. So that's pretty close to that. And we've got some extra spacing on here, but we can deal with that later. All right, so now we've actually got everything we need to create this service block. So now that you've laid it all out, you've applied your settings, you've created all your BEM classes here, right click on your service block, save it as a template, call it your service block, and it's a section, and save it. Okay, now we can get rid of this. Let's say with this container, we're going to put a few of them in here. Inside that container, we're going to set that to a row. We're going to set our gap of normal, so we're going to go var. Again, switch over to here. What's our normal? Gap. FU SPN. Okay, there's our normal gap. Now, we're going to put our template inside there. Now, weirdly in bricks, it doesn't stick them inside where you want to put it. You actually got to drag it into there. So now that's inside. What we're going to do now, duplicate. Duplicate. Well, now we've got 3 of them with our 15 pixel spacing because we use that variable there. All right, now I'm going to show you the problem that I didn't solve on purpose. If I start deleting some of this text, the old equal height problem. Okay. Easy way to solve this. There's a few different ways you can do this. First way is you get your service block footer. Because these are classes, you don't have to re-edit your template. You just have to edit the classes. So you go to the footer, and we tell it we want the style on that to have a margin top of auto. Okay, that's not working yet because I haven't set this correctly. So if I go to the service block and go to my contents, service block content, it is a vertical, whoops, column. Display is flex, and spacing has got to be on stretch. So I forgot to put the stretch on for the service block. So that pushes everything to the bottom, but now our body isn't stretching far enough. So we go to our body block, our body element, and we tell it we want to flex grow. Again, we've got to make sure the class is selected. The flex grow of 1, so it fills in the empty space. And there we go. Now we can do whatever we like in here, and they're always going to be aligned to the bottom and all looking like they're the same heights. Okay. So there's the service blocks that we've created using BEM. All right. Now I'm just going to duplicate this entire row. I'm going to show you the next bit. So the next bit is basically the same component. So I've just duplicated the component. I've put in brackets center, so because I don't want the word center to be copied, so I only want this part outside of the brackets to be copied. And the difference is all of these are exactly the same, except for on this service block header, I've added an additional class which adds the modifier, the 2 dashes of center. Right, so if I look at this here, so that header, everything's modified to line up in the center. All I have to do is copy the modifier class, which includes the entire name. Go back to bricks, go to my heading here. I want to add a modifier. And on that modifier, I want to align everything in the center. Okay. Then I go to my body. And when the body, what I want to do is tell it to align the, sorry, I've got to go back to BEM here. So my body, I've got to grab my center modifier here. And I'm going to add that to that class. And on the center modifier, I'm going to tell it to, I think this one's text, isn't it? It is. So in my typography, I've got to tell it to align the typography in the center. And then on the footer, I've got to go over to the footer. I've got to grab the center modifier, the footer. Where are we? The footer. Add the center modifier. And for the center modifier on the footer, I'm going to align that to the center as well. Okay, so now what we've got is on this particular service block, I have the header with the center modifier. I have the body with the center modifier. I have the footer with the center modifier. So you guessed it, if I want this one to be in the center, I select the header and type center. And here's my header center. All right, body, center, and it's my body center. Footer, center, and there's my footer center. So BEM, so there's my standard blocks and elements, and here's my standard blocks and elements with center modifiers put on each of these. So that relates directly to how I've named these in Figma. So I can start a new project. I'm going to zoom back out here. If I started a new project, or actually I'm just going to draw another frame. So if I grab a frame and draw a frame here, right, and I want a center modified block, I can just go to my assets. I think it's the second one here. You can see that center modified. It might be hard for you to see from there. I'll just grab that, stick it on the screen, and there is my center modified block. I want a grid on this here. Go to my frame, add a grid, which is 10 pixels. Line that up to a grid. There we go. And we're starting to create a layout. All right, so it's as simple as that. Once you've got your components built and defined, you go into Figma, translate that all into bricks, and then it's just a matter of, from your template, copying and pasting all these things. And here's where it gets really cool. So you go into Figma and you go, actually, I don't like this accent color. So you go to your accent and you change that in there to maybe a yellow. So you like a yellow color, or this sort of greenish yellow here. So now that's your accent. I would then probably copy that, go to your accent variation, paste it on there, create a modification of that, where you might sort of darken it a little bit or lighten it, or whatever you want it to do. So you got a variation on it. Let's say we don't really like that secondary. Let's go to the secondary, and we're going to make that maybe a sort of a purpley color. Should we make that purpley? Maybe this purpley sort of a color. A bit more purple in there. Okay, we'll pinch that color from there. Go back to my secondary variation. Then I will then create a variation on that where we'll make it either lighter or darker. So in this case, we'll make it lighter. Fits with that. And there's our variation done. Okay, so how do we then relate this to bricks? Easy. Secondary, copy. Bricks, theme styles, colors. Here's my secondary. Edit that. Save that. Okay, secondary variation. Accent. Accent variation. Done. Now I've got a bricks design using the same element naming, matching my Figma design. So very simple, copy and paste, one-to-one relationship between your colors. If we change our text sizes here, so maybe my normal I want to be 20 pixels, I would then go back to my settings here and I'll make my normal 2 rem and make my normal spacing 20. Simple as that. So hopefully that's a good insight into how your BEM naming can be used and how you can do an almost one-to-one relationship between Figma and bricks. And it's the class system in bricks that makes this possible. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you can get some benefit out of this and start using it in your designs. Let me know what you think.